Okay, so let's get started. Thank you to everybody who's joined. I'm so happy to see the names of the Climate Health Story Project participants on screen, and very, very happy to welcome and introduce you to Kanita Hunter and Estelle Ellis, two journalists whose writing I've been following closely for a very long time. So I also feel very privileged to hear your views today. To those with whom we all met, what's it, almost 3 weeks ago, exactly 3 weeks ago today in Cape Town. Very, very happy to see you again. So as you know, this is the first online workshop or online discussion, and we've titled it "In Conversation with the Two Journalists" because it really is a very informal conversation, your time to ask the journalists questions rather than the other way around. So I'm going to just very briefly introduce each of the two journalists, but I'll actually ask them to introduce themselves more comprehensively and also kick it off with a question to you. There's a bit of echo, but I hope it will disappear soon. And just to say that Kanita Hunter, you will have seen her name if you read the news at all. She's an award-winning journalist. She's been a political editor. She's been in senior editorial positions at News 24. She recently founded the Debrief Network, which Kanita would really love to hear about. It's very nice to hear there are new publications, coming up all the time, new platforms, and we'd love to know what that's all about. She's a sought after speaker. Good to get to know her, and we'll hear more from her in a minute. Estelle Ellis, you may have seen or will have seen her name in Daily Maverick recently, which recently extended its reach to create Baywatch to look specifically after the Eastern Cape area. She's also award-winning. She writes very compassionate stories. You can really see the combination of care and science in her stories. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you all to both of them. I wanted to ask both of you, Kanita and Estelle, to tell us, and whoever wants to go first, why are you a journalist? Why is that what you want to be?
So I think it takes a little bit of madness, Ida. I'm one of those people that did not think that I could be anything else. I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 6 years old. I think telling stories is at the center of what we do and finding out the why. Trust me, I've tried very hard not to be a journalist. I have tried everything to look at, like, maybe there's a world out there, but there's something that draws me to the fundamental power that journalism empowers me with, which is holding power to account and also to be the voice on behalf of other people of people who don't have a voice. So that's kind of like the more bigger picture. But I think what journalism has done for me has become the tool in which I can interpret the world and then interpret the world for others. And so I've done it on a micro level, whether it was, when I used to cover very municipal issues, or bigger than that when I covered the Zuma and the Ramaphosa administrations, to a time now where could go to war zones or go to countries in Africa and make sense of world developments and what they mean. So I think journalism is a privilege. I think that it is a real gift to do what I do every day. And it's not something I take for granted.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Oopsie, there went my camera. Why is that? Okay. And Estelle, for you, why are you a journalist?
Yeah, I think Anita is 100% right. Our old editors used to say, "You born with ink in your blood," and then that's it for you, right? There's no real other way. We all try hard. I studied law first. Every now and again, I go study something else, and then, but it's compelling. It's like a life force to be able to tell stories, and it's such a privilege um to be able to amplify. So I went the other way around from Juanita. So I went smaller, not wider. So that's why I work in the Eastern Cape. So we find the most vulnerable people where there's maybe only 4 or 5 voices. And we amplify it to a national level. So I'm fairly deeply committed to it. I think as I said, it's difficult to explain because it really is in your blood, but also it is your life mission. You're not able to do something else. Like my mother will say, I was born a chaos maker, and I haven't really diverted from that yet.
And I want to ask you, Estelle, how often do you interact with a scientist?
So, for about the last 15 years of my career, I cover the medical systems. So I covered COVID fairly extensively. Um, I write a lot about pollution in water systems because I work in the Eastern Cape. We cover floods and the consequences of floods. And so we do try to engage with, especially with our local scientists who also work on the ground, and we should have more of it because I think it gives a different. We learned from COVID that when there's chaos, scientists bring some form of perspective and order, and that's why we always do try. And just as a small as most recently, I write a lot about malnutrition and hunger in the Eastern Cape, and this is a field where there's almost no data. We really struggle to get proper data in this province. That we've got a little bit of data, but that's just the data the World Health Organization requires the Department of Health to keep, and it's such a small part of what we really need. And then yeah. So I always wish for more. I know we probably all share there's not enough money for research and to do big data things and so on, but I think as we know, I can see the power that will be, but that will have, and that the difference that's a combination of science and journalism can make.
Thank you. And Kanita, I mean, in an average month, how often would you speak to scientists in the journalism that you do?
Not very often, only when politicians have messed things up. So when Trump makes a decision that affects scientists directly, when you have so it's the political decisions in around a pandemic that affects uh, um, uh, so that affects scientists, and then scientists influencing decisions of government. So that intersection is when I would interface with scientists. I must say that up until very recently, I was very intimidated to reach out to scientists, but I also, as an editor, commission journalists to reach out to the different research centers, and so that's a lot more than in the past.
Great, yeah. I think we are such a small group. I'm actually going to ask Marlies and King and Natasha and Aziza. And who is Jay? Is it James?
That's me, yes. Hi there, everyone.
Okay, James, hi. To
Hi.
introduce yourselves. Hello, James. Would you put yeah, thanks, you've put your camera on. Would you, and Natasha, sorry if I didn't mention you, would you just introduce yourselves to Kanita and Estelle, and then we're going to go into questions. Some of you, by the way, have sent questions in advance. We can handle those first. I know actually all of you on the line, most of you on the line actually did send questions. So if you just want to pose your question yourself, that's very fine. Let's start with you, James. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and Estelle and Kanita. Thank you for this opportunity to engage with you. I'm a senior lecturer at the UCT Faculty of Health Sciences in the Division of Environmental Health, and teaching on climate change and health to undergraduate and postgraduate students with a particular interest in education about planetary health and sustainable healthcare.
Thank you, James. James, you actually had a question about how do you sort of teach this to your students? How do you package messages for your students? Do you want to just sort of go straight into that one?
Yeah, so I think it was hard as one tell the story of climate and health in such a way that it engages your audience to care enough, because it can be so overwhelming. And I get that reflection from some that this is just too much and it seems so hopeless. So just trying to convince them that they have agency, that they can make a difference, and that it's really about recognizing the strengths that you have, in your particular role, whether it's a health professional or a journalist or a health economist, and being part of a broader movement for change. Yeah, so making the story engaging enough to really activate people to care and act. Thank you.
Kanita or Estelle?
Estelle, do you want to go? I'm happy to go if you.
Sure. No, I've got a few ideas. James, so what I would tell, I also teach, but what I tell my students is that we connect with each other through our stories, right? So the story of one person, especially with a complex concept like climate change, the story of a person is probably where you can make it compelling, right? Because I recognize, I'm busy working with a story on the impact of the floods in Mthatha, which was devastating. So we are looking into I think it's 258 people who was never claimed. Their bodies are still in the mortuary. But you can find the stories of these people. And then you realize it's so much more than a flood, right? You realize this was the suffering that was caused beforehand, failing crops, why people were where they were. It's not usually some of these people have had more than one disastrous weather event. There are all sorts of other issues. But I always feel I feel like as a journalist and as a publication, we need to connect with our readers like they are a friend, right? So, or a person at a dinner party. And that's why I always say is the story of one person makes things so much less overwhelming, because it might be sad and it might be terribly tragic, but it just crystallizes it for us. And for me, obviously we also defend the truth. That's what Daily Maverick does. So it must be true. Can't make it up. But I try to focus it on the life of real people, because then you can relate. Then it's an auntie or a oma or a someone, not a weird thing out there full of stats and other things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, but
That makes sense.
to add to what Estelle said, if you can't communicate ideas if you don't link it to people and impact. And so personalizing what you're talking about is the only way, and more so in a world where most people, not only young people don't read, but most people don't read, because so the media landscape is quite interesting at the moment, because you have two phenomenons. One is you have the human phenomenon of people getting lazier to read. And then the second phenomenon is that you have artificial intelligence disincentivizing news websites, right? So before, if I had to, for example, Google, I don't know, so dead bodies in mortuary in Eastern Cape, then Estelle's article will come up with Daily Maverick. Now, the AI is stripping Estelle's article and giving me a little suggested feedback without any, and that's enough for me as an ordinary reader to kind of, oh, okay, this is what happened, blah, 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 done. Like I could get a gist. So that's very dangerous for us and this is a new ecosystem that we as media people are not paying attention to, because you already have dwindling audiences. Now you have a tool that's actually de-incentivizing people from actually going to your website anyways, right? And then the third part of it is that you're dealing with attention deficits, right? So people can't read 3,000 words anymore. And those who do read 3,000 words, there has to be a very big personalization. So there's almost the opposite of how we were taught journalism that needs to happen, which is we were told to be flies on the wall, right? That you are not part of the story. Whereas now all the data showing with people reading newsletters, I mean, Maverick does amazing newsletters, right? Where you have to almost locate yourself at the center of it to be like, I went to Dr. So-and-so, he said, like, so that people kind of go on a journey with you. So that, I think, centering the storyteller, especially when it comes to complex issues. And then just two other very quick points is that there has to be a rethink of visual outside of television. So before, you would think of visual as if you're doing a TV interview. Now you have to think of visual to almost bring to life the text piece that gets disseminated. So anything text. So spokespeople, newsmakers, researchers have to realize now that with my article, my press statement, my executive summary, I have to have some visual element, whether it's a short video or whether it's something that's recorded on a phone even, so that, because that's the way people interact with content. And so that's a rethinking that is already happening in terms of how people consume information, but it's not happening in how people disseminate information. So that's the kind of the gap in between.
Yeah, thank you very
Great.
much. Sharing those, thank you. Great points about the platforms and, the changing landscape, and also just, people's stories. Thank you to both. Romain, I know you also put a lot of questions, proposed questions into the registration form. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask them yourself, or ask the most burning one at this point, please? That's to you, Romain. Actually, let's go to Marlies. Let's go to you quickly, Marlies, or King, or Aziza, and there's also Natasha and Charlie. So in terms of questions you had in mind, this is just a free-flowing conversation for now. Towards the end, I'll also bring across a few themes that I've been thinking about, which would be important to bear in mind. But who has a question for Kanita and Estelle? Aziza, yes.
I think
And
I'll go
introduce
next
yourself
because
briefly.
oh
Briefly
yes, of
introduce
course.
yourself, yeah.
I hope it's not too noisy. I'm at the Clean Air Conference. I'm Aziza Rangunwala from Groundwork. Coordinate a program called Global Green Healthy Hospitals, but also do the environmental health campaign at Groundwork. So I actually wanted to come in because I think Anita mentioned some of the things. I realized I started filling in the form and I didn't finish. But one of the things that I've been really thinking about a lot is about this age of misinformation we're living in, and the media landscape that has changed so much in terms of short attention spans, because I feel like on Substack, there's people who write long pieces, we read each other's long pieces, but it's a small community. I mean, obviously Twitter has gone down the drain. It used to be very short threads. Infographics are important. So I just wanted to know, like, how with the fast changing media landscape and all this misinformation that's out there, also the AI slop, they call it AI slop that's out there. How do we effectively engage on media? Because sometimes it just feels like you're putting out these things in a sea of just a lot of junk and someone needs to find the thing. How do we engage the right audience strategically within the landscape of dwindling attention spans and like those quick, grabbing someone's attention? I feel like sometimes when we decontextualize things, and there's lots of sensationalism. I think there was a journalist that posted about a Tembisa hospital CEO that passed away, but he passed away in like 2024 April. Yeah. But he posted it because of the time that this corruption scandal came out. So yeah, I guess my questions is multi-pronged thing of like, I see the sensationalism in our in-person workshop. We spoke about trust, which has been really something I've been thinking about, the trust we build with journalists, which we've never done strategically. I haven't. So yeah, how do we navigate the space, and how do we navigate it effectively within facts, and not to argue about whether climate change is real or not, but to find the community where we like, here's some solutions, or actually here's some problems. And it's funny that Estelle mentioned the hunger. I mentioned it in my talk this morning at the conference that we don't talk about it in South Africa because it doesn't make it to the media, but children are suffering from malnutrition. So yeah, those are things that there's so many multiple things that need to come out from our information and our work. How do we effectively engage on that?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly hard work, right? And when we discuss this at Daily Maverick, our first answer is it's important for us to connect. So you'll see at DM, we do a lot of trouble to connect to our readers specifically, because, you know, in the end, in a world that's really post-truth, where do you find truth? And that's in a personal connection with your reader. And I mean, and that is, it's tiring at being a journalist, because you basically have to keep a really close relationship going with about a lot of people. I don't know how many, but it's hundreds of or tens of thousands of people, and people send you emails, and people get really angry with us if we get something wrong. So I think it's firstly, you need to establish that relationship, and then secondly, we'd love for it to be quick, right? And that's what AI does, and that's what social media does. And these terrible social media news sites with their fancy headlines, they try to establish a quick connection. But you have to change your brain that you're now going to play the long game. You know, if I can go back to hunger, I reported on hunger for almost 4 years before the Human Rights Commission took notice. I was reporting about it almost daily. And so since they took notice, we got some momentum. But now, you know, it's a difficult job. I don't think people realize always that, you know, I think people have an idea of us being journalists, you know, we work until 2 and then we go sit in the pub, or we go do other things, or we go on adventures. But it really is it's a job that has to do with connection. And I think that's why it's difficult to explain, because that's what you have to work on, you know. And I think that for me is my major value, is that, and then what we do and what we produce come from connection. So I'll tell you a quick little story. I work in the Graaff-Reinet community quite often, and about, you know, when all the stories about the spaza shops and the poison in the spaza shops came out and the children were dying, we found there were all these little news snippets that came out on Facebook and everywhere else, that people are putting pills and all sorts of things in the chippies that's being sold to the children, which we now know it was pesticide. But what was quite nice was, because I've been working on that specific relationship with the community of Graaff-Reinet for the last 6 years, they came to ask me to look. And then I said, okay, I'll go find out. And we actually went to get things tested, and we found it. And we actually found out that the person generating it he was opening packets, putting things in it, then resealing it, and then making a big show of reopening it on social media. And he caused complete chaos in his community. But that's that type of exposure and expose only comes from relationships and connection.
Sorry, why? Why does someone do that?
For attention, I would think.
Attention.
Yeah, just to, and I think some people get like a weird pleasure out of communities panicking. No, and I think there was a little bit of xenophobia thrown in there as well. But it was terrible.
I don't know if anybody wants to comment on Aziza's question about the different platforms, you know, and how to get attention.
Can I go with that one? So okay, the instinct is, so when I say nobody reads, I'm not saying that there isn't a market for good journalism. I'm saying that you have to make, it's a compelling case to make for people to read 3,000, 4,000 words like we used to, right? So do people read long form stuff that are deeply contextual? Absolutely, but it has to be premium. You cannot be giving me 2,000 words of yesterday's news today that I've already seen snippets on social media. So that's it. So I see it as like this ecosystem where you have short bite-sized visual hook you in, and then you have long form contextual, which is either longer interviews, longer shows, longer pieces that kind of the sit back type of work, right? Both complement each other. Now, a big part of where we have failed as the media, and I'll be the first to admit it, is that we lost audiences because we did not speak in a language that people wanted to hear. We spoke over their heads. So we lost audiences to who? People who read our work, steal it, and then speak about it on TikTok. And then when we try to go to these platforms, no one's listening to us because we are not speaking to people in a language they recognize. So what a big part of experimentation is, how do you break down complex issues in a way that does not feed into the temptation of trolls and misinformation and like what Estelle said about the the sort of xenophobic sort of clickbait, right? And there are some old journalists who will tell you it's not possible, but I promise you it is, because I'll tell you what we do. The Conversation does amazing pieces where they crystallize pieces from academics and they publish it, right? The Conversation is barely read by the public at large, right? So what we started doing, even with some science stories on my platform, the Debrief Network, we reach out to these academics and say, imagine I'm a 16-year-old, like your 16-year-old sister, and you're having a braai. Tell me about your work. And then record yourself on your phone doing like in selfie style. So the personability of like this doctor whoever is not doctor whoever, but like it's just a Tani telling me about a complex issue. And so it's not about saying like you need to lose the seriousness of what you're trying to communicate, but we have to have regard on how people want. I mean, just track your own behavior in terms of how you consume information, right? And so I think that it's an amazing opportunity because anything's on the table. You can try anything, right? And that's why I feel like if you could do a Zoom interview with SABC News, surely you can record yourself giving me the top 3 things about whatever research you working on, because essentially the information and its integrity is intact. It's the format and medium that changes.
Great, thank you. Let's go to another question, another introduction. King?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kanita and Estelle, for coming to talk with us. All right, I am Luther King Abia Akebe. I am a high-impact researcher at the University of KwaZulu-Natal College of Health Sciences, and I look more on antimicrobial resistance, mostly in the environment, and I see the connection between humans, animals, and the environment. So I'm mostly working on the One Health concept for the past 10 years now. So my question, which I had put there, is how else can one increase visibility without necessarily passing through opinion pieces? I have written, I think, 5 or 6 pieces with the Conversation. I've written a few pieces, I think, with Africa Arguments and some other thing, and some other interviews with Reuters. But now these things only came because most of my pieces, for example, came in during the COVID. And being an environmental scientist, I was seeing that something was missing in the COVID story, which was the environment. So writing that piece led to a TV interview and led to several radio interviews, and that is how it went. But apart from that, I've not had that opportunity. If I've not had that opportunity to say, how else can I reach the media to say something which I think is important without necessarily having to write a piece? Let's take the, let's take the flooding in Cape Town, in Eastern Cape that happened. Now, every focus on that flood, just as Estelle was mentioning, the focus was people lost their homes, some bodies were missing and everything, right? But nobody has spoken about the ripple effect of that flooding after it is gone, because there is massive pollution that happens after that, and it increases chances of people getting sick in that community. Because remember, when the floods come in, there are sewage systems that are broken. We have a lot of informal settlement that gets flooded and washed off, and the interaction between humans and that environment increases chances of them getting sick. But now, such things do not get closer to the journalist. How do I bring that to a journalist without having to write a piece on that? Sorry, Katina said, is it Tanita said she has a phobia for approaching scientists. Scientists also have a phobia to approach journalists, because I was just lucky that after my first piece, one of the lady, Moana, I don't remember, Moana, at the conversation picked me up. So she was searching the news, and anything that was related to my field, she will send me a prompt and say, King, there is this thing. Would you like to write something about it? Our fear
King,
as
I can
scientists
actually,
is that,
yeah.
yes, our fear as scientists is that when we come to the journalists, at times I have written, you write to the journalists and they don't even respond, or they respond and they tell you why now, and then they don't say anything else. So how do we increase that visibility where we can translate the science we do into the language as it's supposed to be, that the common person will understand?
Estelle, Eastern Cape floods, I think I know you want to say something.
Yes, I do. Well, firstly, we really do need to talk, you and me, afterwards, because you're 100% right. And if you speak to the state doctors in the Mthatha region, they're seeing very strange things at the moment. People are genuinely really sick, and they're sick in a way that antibiotics are not helping. But I mean, they come from a harrowing time. I mean, there were bodies decomposing, not only people, but cows and dogs and everything. And like you say, the sewage works collapsed and the informal sickness. Okay. So, I mean, I didn't know that, for instance, that you are interested in this work. So let me just tell you what I would do with someone is, what I would appreciate is if you write to me on my email, which is widely obtainable, and just say, hey, I'm doing this work. Do you want to talk about the Mthatha floods? And I might have questions. And then also, just as a first principle, remember, journalists are terrible at mathematics, right? So don't come at me with numbers, because then I get completely confused. But I think what happens is, I think a lot of scientists think that their work is not relevant to the general news things. But if you, and also they think, so we had Mthatha floods, and then the news cycle moved on, right? And now we've had a whole lot of things that happened since the Mthatha floods. But there are people and news teams that do retrospective work. And like at DM, we focus on that we don't miss out on the forgotten stories. But I do think there's no, I think most journalists would welcome an email that says, oh, I see you work in the Eastern Cape, or you or a colleague doing something on the floods. I've got some info. Do you want to have a chat? And then we can just have a chat. I might say, oh, this is awesome, or geez, I don't understand a word of what you are saying, or maybe you want to talk to my other colleague who's doing something on something else. And I think it's this connection that we need to establish between scientists and our newsrooms. And I know there's a lot of issues, and lots of it comes down to the fact that journals are terrible. When you give them statistics, when you show them graphs, they all go, oh no, we don't understand what's going on here. But I think once you've built up a relationship, King, I could say to you, okay, I understand, but your math doesn't make sense to me. Can we just explain it in a different way, or something like that? But that's the thing. And I also think we should really be using, and we did it so well during COVID, and it's a pity we've lost some of that momentum. During COVID, we were on WhatsApp groups with a lot of the guys who work in the epidemiological fields, with Glenda Gray, and they used to give us information, the people that the sewage testing for COVID particles in the sewage systems. And we were talking science all the time. And then after COVID, we just lost it. And now we've actually got a lot more science to talk. but maybe we should reestablish, if I invite my colleagues, you invite your colleagues. With modern communication, we can actually get it done quite quickly, connect everybody that needs connected. And then if you have something, just put it on there. And I can maybe tell a quick story. We had when you'll all remember the beta
Quick one,
version.
Estelle.
Quickly.
Quick.
So when the beta virus started here in PE where I live, and it was doctors who connected with us as journalists to say, you need to go ask the minister about this because it's not the same thing. And that's how we got it. And now they eventually got the samples tested and the beta virus was identified at the time. But that's the thing. It's that connection. We need to reestablish those connections.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think what I see, many people haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, but I just wanted to say that it just seems so obvious to me that from discussions with scientists, I often hear that, as you mentioned, King, you feel perhaps it is if you have an entire paper or a really kind of story from A to Z, then you can approach the media and then the media publishes that story in your mind exactly as you would wish to have it published. But equally important is to recognize when something is in the news, but the science angle is missing, the environmental angle is missing, the virological angle is missing. And, it might not be the entire story, but it's a crucial element of the story that moves it forward and moves it to better understanding. So, it doesn't always have to be your whole research or your whole story. It could be a very important input into an ongoing story that's absolutely in the news. Great. So Romain and Charlie and Natasha and Malise, who would like to go next by introducing yourself and asking what question you may have?
Hi, Ida. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for pulling this together. And thanks, Estelle and Kanisha, for joining us in this conversation. So very quickly, I am Romain from the Climate System Analysis Group based at the University of Cape Town. And I work at the intersection of climate risks and health outcomes, mainly as a project manager, a researcher, and now also a project lead. And my background spans climate sciences and a bit of social sciences, with particular interest in climate extremes, food security, and health outcomes. And then also how to connect, or working in the space where we try more and more to connect research with policy and communities. And more recently, I've been taking a keen interest in Khayelitsha floods and floods in Cape Town more generally, and then the health challenges and the health outcomes from these floods. And I think a lot of the questions that I had in mind were answered earlier in this conversation. But I do have two questions that I would love to ask. And the first one is, and I think, Kanita, this might be for you, and this is around how researchers like myself working in this climate and health space, there's a lot going on in the space and a lot has been published in the space. But I'm wondering about topics that are more novel, like, AMR and the policy angle to the climate aspects of the climate and health aspects of the research that we are doing. I'm wondering, how do we get such topics, or how do we capture these types of topics in a way that attracts journalists like yourself and those at the decision-making level? So basically, what do you want to see from us, and how would you want us to communicate this to you so that we can get it at a level that's not just speaking to the public, but that also speaks at that decision-making level?
Yeah. So there's two things that come to mind immediately, right? So sometimes the person doing the research is the story, is the way into, because if that person is interesting, then it's the way into the story. So this person has discovered X, so that personalization element of it, right? And then the second thing that comes to mind is that I think in building relationships with newsrooms, right? The idea is, before you introduce the big picture that you want to communicate, the so what must be communicated very quickly. So if it takes a long time to get to the so what of it, you lost me and you lost my, and then even if I give you space, you lost my audience. So if you think of journalists as like ADHD diagnosed 3-year-olds, right? and just to like catch them, take them, and let it go. So I'll give you an example, right? So social media storytelling is something that I'm focused on now, right? But essentially, we focus a lot on climate change, right? So green stories typically get very little views. At News 24, those was like the bottom of your rank when you do anything. Just put climate change in the headline and people don't read it, right? But the thing that I saw was like, people are interested in the extraordinary story. Like this guy used to, was once unemployed and now has, is doing research in da 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 da. Oh, that's a fascinating thing. Like if a person has an interesting story and so what I'm saying is that not package your information as this clinical clean am I making sense? Like this completely agnostic doesn't exist. There's no human element to this sort of random data set. That's the bit where you lose people.
Not too abstract, you're saying, not as an abstract concept.
Exactly.
Yeah, so make it as human and as contextual as possible. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Romain. Malise or Natasha or Charlie?
Hi, I can jump in.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha. I'm a public health medicine specialist working at the City of Cape Town, and one of those epidemiologists that you worked with during COVID. And yeah, I suppose I straddle a little bit between between like the government side and the science side, which I think puts us at a very interesting space. And generally as city officials, we're not the spokespersons for local government. It's our political leads that we provide the words to for any statements. And so, often we just share good news stories. And that's the picture that government really wants to show. But I'm of the opinion, with skillfully crafting a message that includes the good, the bad, the ugly, I think you gain public trust much better. And so I'd like to hear the opinion from the journalists on that thought and how, governments or politicians can, think about approaching the journalism world in that way.
Well, I can tell you this much. If government comes to us with good news, we get very suspicious immediately. And it's a shame. I think we have a lot of issues with our spokespeople in our metro as well, because they're keen to get the good news heard, right? But then the news that matters, I think that's where we need to make a difference is, say, for instance, if we talk, I know this is a sensitive issue for Cape Town, but for us as well, let's talk about pollution in the ocean, right? People swim and they get the H. pylori infections because there's too much poo in the water. And what I would appreciate from a government, what our readers appreciate, is the honesty, saying, listen, we're going to have to close this beach. We've been had a huge spill. This is terrible. Instead of, oh yeah, we're cleaning up and this is how much we're investing in the sewage. I mean, if you ask yourself, what would make an ordinary person's life better? And that's why people consume media in the end, right? Is they need to, there's an aspirational element as well as an informational element. what would make my life better is to know I mustn't go to King's Beach today to go surf because the whole place is full of sewage, right? That will help me, and that for me, that's a honest way to deal with it. But if government starts with, we're investing 10 million rand in the beaches, meanwhile the whole parking lot's full of toilet paper and other things, I will not, and I'll never read a story like that again. So I think it's that honesty is important, but also that element of whether it's not that it's good news or bad news, but how do I improve someone's life when they've read this that is actually useful? I think that's an important element for me.
And that's the thing, right? So that's what what we've been doing for such a long time with the churn, right? Where a government issues a statement, and you say the city of Joburg has announced that it has fixed 40 potholes. Like, what value is that giving to the audience, right? But to the good news, and so this was a conversation that happened at SANEF yesterday, is that you have to solve a problem for your audience, right? So you have to kind of say, NSFAS is in a mess, right? But actually, this is how you apply for NSFAS. I don't know what it is, right? But I'm saying, like, let me give you an example, right? The city of Joburg, the good news is they're sorting out billing. I actually say, this is the way you do it, so that as a resident, I can sort out, like, who has been a victim of the billing crisis can actually go and sort it out. So it has to be that the so what is so important, in a way that remember this bit, right? An engaged newsreader, not an ordinary public, will read maximum 5 articles a day, right? Of which the 5 articles is not guaranteed that they're paying for all of that 5 new, right? So you essentially saying that you're competing with 5 pieces of news in a highly engaged news person a day. So if you're going to take that up with the city has planted trees, like, come on, and then also the distrust of government in itself allows to just recenter the focus. The press release must be about Gogod Lamini, even though it's about government building the house.
Yeah.
So
Thank
if
you
you
for
think
that.
about it, I mean, Juanita can maybe just also confirm this. But I mean, I myself, as a journalist, I receive close to 300 emails a day, right? And then I'm not even counting the WhatsApp messages. So that's the amount of information that we have to deal with. So if there's some bullshit good news story that's coming from a municipality, I can't, because we know, I mean, most of the time we already know, and you can almost see in the tagline, this is not going to be worth the time to read this, to even make it into a story. So yeah, so honesty is important. Even if it's bad, we appreciate honesty better if it's a bad situation than trying to do whatever it is that the spin doctors do.
Thank you. Romain, you have another question, and we have a few minutes left. Just please be very quick, because I'm
Sure,
sure
yeah.
Nandita and Charlie might also have something.
Sure. And I think it's a bit of a build onto this. And I'm wondering about, the tensions that you guys face between reporting something that's objective and true, and then that possibility of what you are reporting turning into something that becomes a little bit of a political stir or a political problem between the media house itself and the public, or even at political level and the media house. How do you handle these tensions? And what are some lessons we as, researchers and practitioners within the climate and health space take from that?
Anyone want to go for that?
It is a difficult question. Look,
Sorry.
we're not, it's okay. We're not conflict averse. We know what we write. You can't, a popular journalist probably doesn't do their job well. I fight with people all the time. I had the premier go on public stages for 3 years saying I lied about hunger in the Eastern Cape until Human Rights Commission found it. And then the other day was at a hearing and he said, oh, yeah, sorry, it's actually been much worse than we thought. And then I thought, so what happened with the 3 years of denial? But you just have to handle it. We have thick skins.
Thanks. And Marlies and Charlie.
So hi, Marlies Craig. I work at the Africa Health Research Institute, joined there earlier this year, supporting some projects on flooding and mental health and all kinds of things, background in malaria. I won't spend any time. But in my private time, I also communicate with the sort of public and children on climate change and things like that. And I've got some questions around. I mean, some of the questions are, So, can you change people's viewpoints, and if so, how? Because you always find those. Mostly, I just ignore people like that who, you're talking about what can I do about climate change, and then they go like, oh, and they go off on a tangent, and it's like, okay, whatever. Is there a way to convince people to actually stop and listen and rethink and reevaluate their preconceived ideas? And I mean, there's so much misinformation. Is there a way to do it? I've read many articles about it. What is your opinion about this? I don't even sometimes know if it's possible. And then another question is, how can we elevate sort of African issues and African agendas so that they become global world talking things? Because so much of the climate change debate is just dominated by other forces. And how do we get some, like malnutrition, like how do we get that thing spoken about? Those are my two questions. Thanks.
That's what keeps me up at night, Moni. Our issues on the continent, how do we make people care? And then the second thing is like, how do you get people to care about things that don't directly affect them? That's like something that takes up a lot of my mind. I think that it has to do with how much of attention you give everything else, right? And you have to be deliberate about it. So Estelle, for example, is a huge inspiration to all of us to keep on malnutrition, because it's the most unsexiest story. I think your editor probably rolled their eyes every time they saw
Often.
the stories, because it's you have to just kind of like think about the demands of the day, think about the pressures of readership, think about, and honestly, we because we kind of have to balance public interest and what the public is interested in. The public is not interested in your malnutrition stories, right? So you have to make them interested. So so you have to kind of keep at it until not anymore, right? So it's a huge amount of it takes a lot of braveness and courage to be like, I don't care. I'll give you an example. We are developing news for Gen Z on our platform, right? The decision yesterday was to unpack the Public Sector Amendment Bill, the most boring piece of legislation that can, but it's solution driven in that it solves a big problem that we've been talking about for 20 years, which is cater deployment, right? And so sometimes you just have to say, suck it up, we're gonna focus on it. But I think that think about a concept called dialer quote. I hate it, but I'm going to talk about it. There are some experts, especially in your social sciences fields, whatever. They are always ready, always available to communicate. It's not complicated to get engagement or conversation. So if I'm a radio producer and I need to fill time, right? Now I'm going to approach you, and at UWC, now you must get permission from your bosses. Then you want 48 hours lead time. And then you understand, there has to be some agility to say, there's never going to be this perfect environment of how communication must happen and so be agile in the way that, okay, if an opportunity comes, I'm ready. And there's often a copycat effect. And as I'm saying, for example, with the conversation will publish a piece. Hardly anyone will read it besides us in the industry that are looking for interesting stories. And then, hi, I'll reach out to you and say, okay, here's a topic. Well, just on Africa, right? So this is what I'm kind of focusing on, because I report on, I'm trying to tell bigger stories. And so I did the uncomfortable thing of pitching African stories to both local newsrooms and international newsrooms, just to see actually what is the appetite. Listen, the appetite is not there. To tell a story about a fishing community in Lamu, nobody cares, right? Even in a date like today, where Morocco is the biggest, hottest thing, where Gen Z is literally going to overthrow a dictatorship, autocratic monarch, in the coming days, if it looks like it, it's still not, you can't give resources. So it's a resource element. So I think that we can't have the conversation about what's covered and not covered without talking about the sustainability of media and the direct role it plays in democracy. And so if any spaces of influence that you guys have to understand that you are almost stakeholders in the sustainability of the media.
Yeah,
I think that's very true.
yeah. Thank you for that. I know we're now at time, but Charlie, you've not had a chance. I hope everyone's okay to hang on a bit more, and I'm sure you have a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. Thank you to the two amazing journalists for the sharing today. My name is Charlie Sitong Zhang. I am the founder and president of the Coalition for Global Health Innovation. We are a youth-led global nonprofit with over 100 young professionals from 6 different continents. So we're truly global. And since we're a youth-led organization, so we're all very young people, we are all like with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, or we're doing PhD, and we want to start a blog. We have around 2,000 followers on LinkedIn. We have a quite global reach. So we want to start a blog on our website and also start a series of reels, because our members are from all over the world. So we want to share the stories, because we are focusing on global health and planetary health. So stories from the ground, from the local communities, and from young people who are very educated and passionate about their activism. So what would be your advice for us? Like, how do we produce content in a way that is credible and attractive to the global audience, as young people between the age of 18 to 30? Thank you.
I would say that conversation needs another hour.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. How much longer will you stay? Charlie, I'm just going to post something here in the chat, which relates a little bit to what you've just said, but in fact, actually also to what most people have spoken about, is how do you get attention across different audiences? Because sometimes the research you do, Charlie, in your case, the audiences you want to reach are, some are on this platform and some are on another. But as Kanita said earlier, sometimes the essence of the content is one core thing. It's one thing. When we write stories as journalists, we also sort of have a focus, a very focused, almost like a focused statement for the story. And that focus statement, that core essential thing that the story is about, can work on TikTok and can work in a more serious format on LinkedIn, and can work on Instagram, can work more visually on Instagram, etc. I really liked what Kanita said about, this selfie, and why not just talk to the selfie? And because all of us, I almost want to bet, consume information listening to people say a few words on those videos that scroll, on Facebook or on Threads, and on, of course, on Instagram and so on. So if there is a good story to be told, and if it's told in an impactful way like that, Marlies, the story that you highlighted, the falling down, what was the headline again?
The falling down
place. The falling down place. You know, it attracts your attention because of an unusual title. And there is a core story there. But that same core story, what Bhekisisa usually does really brilliantly, is to have the same core, but in the appropriate format for each social media platform. And I think that works really well. So that's that. I hope in part answers how do we get more audiences to be attracted into this story. Yeah. Kanita, I'm really really curious about the platform that you've created. I wonder if you could tell us a little more about that.
Okay, I committed career suicide. I left a stable job at one of the biggest news publications in the country last year, and I left News 24, and I decided, let me figure out what comes next. And I think what's helpful in that regard is that I always say it's the benefit of not having school fees to pay, right? So you can go and wander around the world. So I realized two things. So traditional newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller because the business model is not working. Therefore, there's not money. There's no money to employ journalists, etc., right? So that's the ecosystem. News 24 is an exception because they have a successful paywall, but again, it's an exception, right? So that's you have it on one hand. So a shrinking media landscape from when I started 15 years ago, right? On the other hand, you have this booming content creation, especially this news creation, which doesn't have any of the same ethics, doesn't have the same boundaries, barrier to entry. It basically steals content across and then amplifies and reaches audiences. And then I realized that for Gen Z, it's not even about the choice of not buying newspapers, for example, or paying for news. It's just not in their ecosystem. It's not in their reality, right? And so if we don't go to the platforms where people are, they're going to consume the disinformation, and that's just it, right? So the vacuum, nature doesn't, allow for vacuums. That misinformation is going to creep in. So the debrief network is essential. So I still work write for News 24. I report for Newsroom Africa. I still do all of traditional what you call dinosaur journalism. But I decided to focus on building what I'm calling a news creator platform. So news creators are journalists who tell stories like content creators, right? So what is a popular thing that you would see on social media? Spend the day with me as I have coffee with my friends. So what we're doing is spend the day with me as I go to Tembisa Hospital that has been ravaged by corruption. And it goes viral. Why? Because people do want to be heard in normal tones. So a big part of what we're doing is running this the debrief network newsroom, but that's not my primary focus. There's someone who runs it. We have young reporters and we're building, and Estelle can tell you it's hard work. But the second part of it is training on both ends, training journalists for visual storytelling and social storytelling. And so what's called our news creator program, and I'm working with the social platforms to understand how to use it, etc. And then people like yourself to understand, okay, what is failing with your old school press release, and how would you then communicate in visual way? So Charlie, to what you're saying about Instagram reels and stuff, it's not about just simply putting a press statement, reading it out on a social media video. It doesn't work that way. So there's ways to deliver information differently on social platforms. So that's basically what I'm trying to do. So the actual platform is my R&D. So we make mistakes there, and I take those mistakes and I go into newsrooms, work with creative platforms, working with SANEF. We're going to be doing some work with TikTok to bridge that gap, because yesterday SANEF had a conversation with content creators and journalists. We speak two different languages,
Just to quickly, just to make sure, Kanita, that everybody knows the South African National Editors Forum.
Yeah. which is trying really hard to transform this industry, and to answer a lot of the questions that you guys had about, like, how do you get attention to issues that are unpopular when it's easier to just spread misinformation. And if everybody is becoming a podcaster and a commentator, who's actually reporting the news? So that's the big problem that we're trying to. So it's called the Debrief Network. And we're still a long way from success, but it has been an amazing experience. Probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Thank you so much
That's
for that.
amazing. And how do you actually then earn money from that? I mean, if nobody wants to pay, and
we don't. I haven't answered that question, which is why I still have to work 3 other jobs. So if you have any ideas or any rich uncles,
yeah, I mean, that media hasn't figured out its business model. It has not been figured out how credible content can be paid for properly without, donors. And then we saw with US government withdrawal, what can happen if you're overly reliant on a donor, obviously. This has been so fascinating. I really wish we had more time, but there will be another conversation with journalists, as you all know. That will be sometime in early November. And really, thank you so much for your time, Kanita and Estelle, and for your insights. That's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure.
It's fantastic. Was fantastic. Just wanted to interrupt. Sorry for interrupting, but it was really,
No,
really
I'm glad.
I had lots of notes.
We have a recording, so you can have that, and we can actually pull together some quotes from that, because I heard very many quotable quotes, actually, almost like dial-a quote from the conversation. So thank you so much, everybody. Good. See you soon. And I really want to say, if you actually have in mind, I don't know, Estelle and Kanita, I can't speak for you, but if a follow-up question should come up for anybody, just forward it to me on the group, and I'll forward it to both of them, because I think they're passionate about this and they wouldn't mind answering. Thank you. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've sent my details if anybody wants to drop me an email. I'll promise I'll read it.
Great. Can you put yours in? Oh, you've put it in. Thank you, Kanita. Yours is also in. Okay, wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good Thursday evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.